So leading up to publishing the book on or the set of books on tattooing that I've been writing for 200,000 years, I decided to jump onto video and do a few interviews with some of the people that I found to be have really great stories or good speakers. And today I'm here with Dave Monroe, and he's certainly one of the greatest storytellers and interesting people that I've spoke to after interviewing hundreds of tattooists across the country. So I've asked him here to join us to talk about his early days in tattooing and his apprenticeship. I think you're going to find it to be a very fascinating story that a lot of us in the industry don't know much about the shop that Dave originally came from. So welcome, Dave. Thank you.
In 1992, Toby owned a shop called Accents of Skin. Prior to that, Toby was Gary Chinese apprentice. Post-apprenticing under Gary, she ended up at Midway, which held many noted kind of tattooists in the late 80s era for Toronto, Mississauga. Post working at Midway, which was called Midway because it was halfway between Studio One and Beachcombers. Toby moved towards Dufferin Queen and Beaconsfield, close to Dufferin, and she opened Accents of Skin, which was heavily noted for her tattooing a number of celebrity rock stars, members of Skid Row, Great White, and a number of other bands throughout that sort of giant hair era, which Toby was a huge, huge fan of. She had this magnificent mane that was at least 6 feet long that she would have cascading down from the top of her head in a high top ponytail. And she was not partial to any set of heels under 3 inches. She was a fairly unique creature. I had gone to see some friends' bands play at Broncos, I think was the name of it. Brought a friend from the neighborhood with me. And he wasn't playing well with others. He was getting a little mouthy. He was saying all the wrong things to all the wrong people. It was going to turn ugly very, very quickly. And I remembered that we had passed the tattoo shop on the way in. So I was like, well, get him out of here, take him into the tattoo shop. And at the time, I just really wasn't familiar with it. The only shops I knew was Adventure and Tattoo-Rama. Bill Baker's old shop. Bill would have owned it still at that time, I guess. No, Bill would have sold it. Oz would have owned it by then. And so we wandered into the shop. The front had a sectional couch and had a bunch of like photo albums, which eventually I would discover were a fairly contentious item. So at a later date, I had a conversation with Bill Baker where he was just sort of like, did you recognize any of that stuff not looking like her work? And supposedly one of her people had sort of swung by Tattoo-Rama someday and swiped Bill's portfolio and had worked its way into her portfolio. But I mean, as far as I could tell, like, her work was of a caliber that you just didn't really encounter. And it was not Bill's level, but it didn't seem far behind, I guess, which is ridiculous to say considering part of the portfolio was Bill's. But, I hadn't realized that. And as we were kind of sitting there and going through the stuff, her husband at the time, this guy, Paul, kind of came out, and he was, your very classic tattoo shop salesman guy. Like, he's not friendly, but he is friendly. He's going to throw information at you that doesn't really have any information to it. He engages you. He tries to draw you in. And like, he started in on my friend, and like, he's like, his first time in the shop. No, I've been in the shop before. He's like, you're impressed with the work. And he's like, nah, it's not that good. And it was just a dead stop. He's like, what do you mean she's not that good? You know who she tattoos? Do you know who you're talking about? He's like, I don't care. Can't draw. It's awful. Like, this stuff is garbage. And I had already pulled this idiot out of one scenario where he was about to take a beating. And I'm like, you know what? This guy with the crutches, he's going to break your head open, and I'm going to let it happen. I'm done. I'm done saving your ass. This is your moment to suffer. And as opposed to suffering, this jackass draws me into the conversation. Is my guy over there can draw better than your wife any day. And he's like, fucking what? And like I watched this very large man who had veins that would start somewhere in his shoulder and end somewhere in his forehead, just sort of turn around. And it was like, his breath was just all over my face. He was like, you draw? And I'm just like, yeah. He's like, you any good? I'm like, He was like, bring in a portfolio. If you're any good, we'll hire you. And that was my offer for an apprenticeship. I was 17 at the time. I hadn't graduated high school. I was, not looking at a lot of great prospects based off of the effort I had put into going to high school. So this seemed just as tangible as absolutely anything else. Like I was really looking forward to getting a job in the Loblaws warehouse that was around the corner from my folks' house. All my friends were doing it. It was unionized. It paid well. If you didn't pay attention to what people were hiding in the freezer, you got extra money at the end of the week. It was a great job, especially for the, early 90s. If I could have had lifelong ties to organized crime as opposed to getting lifelong ties to organized crime. But we ended up, I didn't have a clue what a portfolio was. I had no idea. I'd never done an art class. I had created enough complications in high school that they were actually sort of studying how I learned things because it was just so weird to them. Nonetheless, I, put together a bunch of drawings, mostly on biology tests that I never answered, but had done whole comic book lines in, and brought these things down. And Toby looked at them. And I mean, admittedly, if someone sent this to me, even 20 years ago, I would tell I don't even know if I'd respond to their message. Like it would be, no, I'm not entertaining this. If I say hi to you, I've gone too far. But, she's looking at it and she's like, this is garbage. Like this is absolute garbage. Like you've got something. And Paul was really selling her on it. He was just sort of like, no, look at the way he's angled this. Like, he's changed the dimension of this. He's drawn from a weird perspective. And I had been like goofing off with graffiti already at that point in time. If there was something that could marginally get you in trouble for no particularly great reason, I was probably involved in it. And that was giving me, it gave me perspective and dimension that like I couldn't necessarily apply without the context of taking something to a larger size. So like a lot of the drawings were, were not straightforward as far as like traditional 2D tattoo renderings. And Toby was really sort of gauging it like, in that fashion. Paul was kind of working her way around it. But really he was just selling her on the concept of me being there, which I thought was for my betterment, but really it was to exploit me for free labor. So they ended up giving me the job. I got the warning. You fuck up. Not going to be good. I was like, all right, 17. I fuck up constantly. It's all I do. So, end up going home, and they told me to come back in 2 weeks, which is about maybe like a week after I graduated high school. And, the reality hit me that like, I don't even know when this is open. Like, I don't know when the store's open. I don't want to call because then I would show that I wasn't showing any forethought into this process. So I was like, all right, well, they open at noonish. But if they're open at noon, she's got to do drawings. She's got to be there beforehand. I got to be there to help with whatever the hell that means. And they'd definitely be there by 11. But if they're there for 11, what if you got a lot of drawings to do? What are you going to show up at 10? So I ended up getting there for like 8:30 in the morning, 9 in the morning. And at the time I was living in Mississauga. It was like 2.5 hours of travel to get to that location. And so I'm just sitting on the front stoop. There was a Korean convenience store next door to it. And the woman who was operating is like setting out the flowers in the morning, and she's staring at me, and like every time she'd bring out a couple flowers, put them down, look at me, kind of shake her head, walk away, and come back out, put out some more flowers. And finally she's just like, you getting tattooed today? And I was like, no, I start work here today. And she's like, do you? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, did you watch the news last night? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, they were busted for dealing heroin last night, so I don't think you're starting work today. And I'm like, what? So I turn around. I'm sitting on the stoop. I never thought to look through the window, you know. So there was bars on the inside. The windows were like there was like a mylar filter that had been kind of put up to make it a little tinted. And you looked in, and like all the flash is knocked off the walls. The sofas are flipped. There's like, you know, like the foam on the inside of the sofas have been cut open just in case there's stuff stashed in it. The place is tossed. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, I don't have another plan. Like this was, you know, someone offered me a future 2 weeks ago and I got no contingency plan. I didn't apply for a job at Loblaws, so now I'm screwed. You know, because all my half-wit friends did as soon as they graduated high school. And I'm just sitting there. And as I'm sitting there, I can hear this screaming down the road. And it's, God damn it, fucking police. They fucking just, everybody, always did, never help it. And it's like, you know, like the noise is getting closer. I can see Toby. The visual of Toby kind of looked like someone who had just stepped off a set of like We Will Rock You by Helix, you know, like all in leather, this mane of hair, this giant duffel bag, which was what she carried her machines and some of her drawings in. And she's just swearing and cursing going down the street. And like, as you kind of looked around, not a single human's fazed by this. This is a daily scenario in the neighborhood. So I'm just sort of sitting on the front stoop and she walks up and she's like, I guess you fucking know by now. And I'm just like, I heard there was some problems and fucking try to help someone out, you know, one of the fucking locals and like give him some money. And what does he fucking do? He fucking like goes to the fucking pigs, tells them that we're fucking dealing heroin so he can lessen his fucking charge. And look at this shit, you know, like they fucking ruined the place. And I mean, I was a miscreant, you know, low level miscreant. And like, I'd had enough trouble with police that I was kind of like, okay, that happens, you know, like people get confused, they make poor choices, and like situations like this unfold. It happens. And she's just sort of like, look, I get it. You don't want to be around, you can fucking leave. I don't need you. Just fuck off. And I'm like, no, you know, like that's all right. And she's like, good, because I can't run the shop by my fucking self. So get in here. And so she had me like, you know, I'm rehanging all the flash, putting the sofa back together, trying to figure out what things I should touch, what I shouldn't touch, like trying to get the stuff together. She's still cursing away. There's like where she was the only female tattooist in Toronto for quite a long time. And even most of Southern Ontario, her client base was largely women, like, you know, like 85% women. But it was also very heavily business oriented women. So you weren't sort of seeing the locals that you would see in that neighborhood. And most of them were always out of sorts once they were down there, you know, like if they could check on their car 15 times in 1 minute, they were, because like someone might be leaning on it. Like you never know if there's going to be a handprint. They won't come off the paint job. You know, like it was a very different dynamic. So like, you know, the woman that had come in just post this for her appointment, like was ill prepared for the conversation she was about to get, as like Toby laid out the scenario of having the police, you know, kick in the front door and like, you know, take over. And that was day one. That was the beginning. It didn't seem as ominous at the time. Paul would call constantly, and I didn't fully understand that he had access to a phone. And like she had sort of like, he was dealing with a hip infection at the time that involved basically an open wound to leach it. And so that's why he was on crutches and, you know, usually not moving around the best. And, you know, she had told me that since he had been picked up by the police due to a prior during this arrest, that he ended up in the hospital. He was in the hospital. It just happened to be a prison infirmary, and I didn't know it. So it wasn't until about like, you know, 6 months later then Paul kind of surfaced. And I talked to this guy easily 2-3 hours a day. That he came through the door, and I discovered just how bad everything actually was. Because like when he came through the door, I was like, "Hey, Paul," and he's like, "Shh." and he stumbles his way straight past, like, like the front to the tattoo area, straight to the back. And you just see Toby's head just like, what? Like, and immediately the machines throw down. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? We had to put up the house to get you out, you asshole. We're going to lose everything. And he's like, shut up. Nobody knows. And you're like, oh, fuck. They were dealing heroin. I'm in the middle of this. And all I could think was like, I gotta learn how to tattoo real fast to get the fuck out of here before I go to jail for this. And it wasn't too long after he surfaced that like a couple of, I guess, the older friends would kind of pull up, hop out of the car with like a newspaper under their arm, and then wander in, leave without the newspaper. And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to jail for a Class A felony. This is so bad. But yeah, that was my beginning and introduction into tattooing.
In the when I was working through your profile, the ending of this, your parting ways with Toby, was pretty fascinating. So
Oh
you
God, yeah.
decide that you're going to quit, and how does that go down?
I guess I had never really dealt with a classic abusive situation. I had definitely gone through some crap as a kid, and I didn't ever deal with the person who builds you up to knock you down. I hadn't encountered that. And like Paul had really sort of, I mean, he was such an aggressive personality type that he had really sort of worked his way inside my psyche. And I literally got twitchy, to a point that I was twitchy when he was around. Like, just, I was second guessing everything. It didn't matter what I was doing. If I was like putting a book on a shelf, I was worried that I fucked it up. It was a very intense time period, and like things were spiraling out of control horribly. So Toby had finished up a tattoo, spilled a bunch of ink on the ground, and they had the old sticky tack black and white floors. So like, I mean, they stained very easily, especially after you've been running over it with like a rolling chair or anything like that. So there's like kind of grooves, and like I was like mopping up the ink, and Paul walks in and he's just like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm like, what? And he's like, how long you fucking been here? And I'm like, why? And he's just like, you call that fucking clean? Is that fucking clean? You don't know how to fucking clean? You don't fucking know shit. And like this guy tosses the crutches away, like, which was his like go-to in any scenario. You want to punctuate a sentence, throw a fucking crutch at it, like just end anything
Yeah.
with a crutch flying in a direction. And like, so he hits the floor, and he's grabbed a toothbrush and like soap, and he's just like, "That's how you fucking clean a floor, you idiot!" And he's scrubbing away, and I'm standing there just like, God, what am I doing in here? And I look down, and he's bright red, and the veins are just protruding everywhere. But then he's not really red; like his lips are purple, and then he's kind of this weird bluish color. And he's gasping, and his left hand goes up, and he grabs at his heart, and I'm like, fuck, he's having a heart attack. So I grab the phone, and he looks at me, he's like, what are you fucking doing? And I was like, I'm calling an ambulance. He's like, you put that fucking phone down, or I'll fucking kill you. And I was like, what? He's like, put the phone down. If an ambulance comes, they know I'm not in the fucking house, and I'm going back to jail, and this is all fucking over. Put it fucking down. And I sat back in my chair. Anyway, he hits the floor like a fish out of water, and the color starts coming back to his face, and he's shaking out his hand. And all I think to myself is, this prick's gonna fucking live. And I'm so bummed. Like, I'm so bummed. And I walked out at the end of my shift, and I realized that I was literally just excited to watch a human being die in front of me. Ended up going back to my girlfriend's at the time's place. Lots of reflection on the way, and I was like, I gotta quit. Like, there's no other option. I have to leave this. I can't be that human being. And I phoned up, and I was like, look, like, it was a very classic apprenticeship. I wasn't getting paid. I was already tattooing. They were taking like 50% of that, but like, my income was my knowledge base that I was learning. So I told them I ran out of money. And like Paul was just like, all right, okay, that happens. Like, you go get a job, second job, you paint. You sell some paintings. You do whatever you need. You need to get back in here. When you finish this up, like, honestly, the whole shop's going to be yours. Toby needs to move to the States anyways. Like, there's more money. We're going to Arizona. All this is yours. This is all going to be yours. Like, you need to get your shit together and then, like, get back here. And in my head, like, not a fucking hope in hell. No, never. No, I'm not. No. And I was like, all right, I got to get my stuff because it's everything I own. All the money that I ever had, I'd lost into the process of apprenticing and buying equipment. That's it. That's all I've got. And I really didn't plan on continuing tattooing. Like, this had pretty much let me know that this was not my world. And I knew their son Danny was going into a school that was across the city. Paul would usually have to leave at like 1:00 to pick him up, and he'd be gone for hours. He wouldn't make it back till 5 after he had picked him up. And I thought, well, if I go in on Monday, he's going to expect me to show up. So I'll leave it. I'll leave it till Wednesday. I'll come on Wednesday. So I get to the shop and, like, you know, I'm expecting the riot act, like totally expecting to get chewed out. And I go in, Toby's tattooing. She's like, oh, you're fucking showing your face in here. I can't believe you do this to me. You're fucking all my fucking time wasted on a fucking piece of shit like you. And, like, just, you know, chewing me out, made me feel bad. And part of me is like, I don't fucking care. You know, like, I've witnessed too much garbage in this scenario for me to really be that bothered by not following through on this. I'm still young. Like, you know, like, I turned 18 now. Like, you know, the world was my oyster. So she had everything already boxed up. She already knew I was going to come for it. So it was all set up in a box. So that was set on my workstation. Took a peek in just to make sure my shit was in there. Pick up the box, walk out of the tattoo area, which would open right up into the sort of the waiting area with a sectional couch, which is a beeline to the door. And the door just swings open and there's Paul and Danny. And Paul's just sort of like, you thought you wouldn't have to talk to me because I'd have to get the kid. And I was like, yep. And he's just like, you didn't count on the fact that I would sit across the street in Country Style Donuts and wait for your ass to show up, did you? Nope. So he had literally sat in the parking lot across the street every day. Kid held out of school, waiting just to fucking destroy me. You know, he's like, get in the back room. So I walk into the back room like a moron, forgetting that the back room's door locks on the outside. So I get locked in, and I'm there about 20 minutes. It felt like forever. And I really didn't know what the fuck's going on. Like, I'm sitting with my back to a wall, you know, like, just in case someone's kind of try to do something to my kidneys, like, you know, like, everything's in front of me, you know, and then I have the box in front of me because it's got some weight. I can, like, hit somebody with that if I have to. And Paul walks in, and he walks in with one of the guys that would do regular deliveries to the shop. And he sits down directly across from me, and he takes a gun out of his coat, puts it on the table in front of me. And Paul was like, you know who he is? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you know why he's here? I'm like, no. He's here to ID you. If I ever hear that you're in another tattoo shop, he's going to show up and he's going to shoot you. And I, for all intents and purposes, you know, had no reason to believe that wouldn't happen. You know, like, I mean, what's this guy got to lose? Like, you know, like, I was already aware that, like, hey, he's been busted for dealing heroin now twice. And that he's just out of jail and he's got a heart going. Like, he's not planning on living through this scenario, which oddly he did. You know, this is really, they felt pretty fucking real. And oddly, there's been a few incidents in my life where guns have been pulled on me. And oddly, I've never handled this properly. And what he was really trying to do was scare me out of my equipment. And he's just like, well, you know, you're not going to be tattooing because you know you're not going to be tattooing. So leave your box. And I was like, no, that's everything. That's all my money right there on that table. And I mean, admittedly, there was probably 10 people I could have sold that to in Toronto at the time. You know, like, odds are someone in a shop probably wouldn't touch it, especially if my name was connected to it and connected to Toby. They wouldn't touch it, but I'd have to find some sketchy person to purchase it. So I really, like, moving that stuff was not going to be easy either. And I was like, I'm not letting it go. You know, and he went to touch the box, and I just kind of pulled it in. So it's just right in front of me. And he's like, well, leave her a couple of machines then. I'm like, no, I'm not leaving anything. And he's like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah, I'm serious. I'm not leaving. You're not getting a fucking thing. It's not happening. And I picked up the wings, my box, and I walked to the door. It was open, walked out, got about a half a block before I started fucking puking, like just shaking, sweat pouring off my body, like the whole realization that all of this had just transpired. Like I was not mentally prepared. Like, what are you doing on a Wednesday? Well, some lunatic's going to point a gun at me, try to rob me of everything I own and what little knowledge base I'd actually accrued, in a very short period of an apprenticeship. And, sat down, realized that they weren't behind me, because that was the next thought, was like, I'm just going to hit this alley. And all I hear was like, pop, pop, like got to the subway, went home, and I was just like, fuck. No. So, ironically, as a carryover in that story, I started getting tattooed at Tattoo-Rama by Oz. And like at the time, it was Oz, Scott McEwen, Shane Faulkner, and Mike LeDrew was working the door. And I would go down on Saturdays, get tattooed. I was working at a construction site at the time doing night security. So I would just roll in. Saturdays were first comes, first served. So I'd roll in on the Saturday morning, snag first spot, get tattooed. And I remember I was sitting in there one day getting tattooed, and Mike came out to the back, and he's just like, hey, there's someone on the phone for you. And I'm like, that's weird. I get on the phone, and all I hear is like, come to the fucking front window. I'm like, what? He's like, it's Paul. Come to the fucking front window. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And like, he's across the street in his car, and he's pointing at me, and he's like, I fucking told you what would happen if I found out you were tattooing in another shop. And I'm like, dude, I'm bleeding. I'm getting tattooed. I don't work here. And he's like, you fucking say whatever the fuck you want, but I'm fucking coming for you. And I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And he's like, no, fuck you. And like, I know where you are. And he like, revs the engine and sort of takes off. And I hang up the phone and I look at Mike. And he's just like, what the fuck was that? And I was just like, that was fucking Paul Martin. He's coming back to kill me. And he's like, fuck off. And Oz is like, just by me, he's fucking said what? And like, Oz is out the front fucking door, like standing in the middle of fucking Bloor Street, just giving him the finger. He's like, fuck that guy. He's like, he fucking comes back. Don't you fucking worry about it. We got it. We'll take care of this. And I'm just like, but I'm not tattooing. Like, I'm getting tattooed. I've fucking walked away from this, like, I don't even, fuck it, man. Like, I don't even know what to say. And ironically, he accidentally, 2 years after that, he almost killed me by accident. So like I was driving on Lakeshore late one night, and some fucking lunatic decided to try and pass in the oncoming traffic line. Like he just zigzagged around people. And just as he almost hits me and I pull to the side, it was fucking Paul. Like complete, what's the odds? Like I'd recognize that horrible hair and those stupid veins anywhere. And I was like, God damn it, this motherfucker will not leave my life alone. But that was it. That was my exit from tattooing. And it was 4 years after that I finally kind of came back in. But it took a long time. It took a long time for me to feel comfortable, even with the concept of being around that side of the industry. Like getting tattooed, I was fine with, but like being back in it, like I had to go to university, spend some time in there, realizing this isn't going to work for me. Like this is not, I just don't fit into this kind of structure. And like deciding to go back to tattooing, and like within a few months of me returning to tattooing, Toby actually ended up ODing and dying. That was in 96, early summer. I'm not going to remember which month off the top of my head, but yeah, pretty wild.
Well, that's an incredible story, Dave. I really appreciate you jumping on to Zoom here and sharing that with us. I'm sure people are just going to be slid down their seats.
Yeah, those followed immediately by like, yeah, so I brought in a portfolio, and the guy said $5,000, and I started tattooing.
Yeah, like if there's anybody out there that has a better story than that, and I haven't interviewed you, I want to pay you $100 just to do it.
Shit, I just discovered how to not do things for free, didn't I?
Yeah, there you go. Anyways, it was such a great story, and if you found that story fascinating, wait till you read the book and you see the rest of his story. Dave's a pretty cool guy. He has a lot to say, but and it's pretty interesting to listen to. Again, thank you so much, Dave, for coming on and doing this.
No, not a problem. Thanks for putting all this together, Ned. I'm really looking forward to the book.
Yeah, me too. It's been a blast to get back
It's been a
into.
spell. It's been a while.
It's been a long time, and I just finally kind of got the gumption. It's time to do it. I'm glad I waited. Some of the people that I couldn't get a hold of, I couldn't get a second with, I can get a couple hours with now. It just seems like it's a good time to make this book happen and, bring a little love into this industry and connect us all. And, it's interesting when you learn somebody's story, you feel a little more connected to them. So,
yeah. Oh, definitely. It's, either like, I mean, the industry has changed so dynamically, and like it is, it's never stopped being interesting, which is kind of a fascinating thing. But so many elements of it bordered on folklore, and then you actually meet the people and you're like, nope, that was all real. That's wild.
I know, right?
It's just so many unique opportunities followed up by even more bizarre ideas on how to handle them.
Yeah, 100%.